Erica. So what's going on with the Joe Budden podcast, man? It looks as if Rory and Mal has decided to quit the show. We don't know if they're coming back no more, okay? Now, listen, I'm a podcaster myself, you know what I'm saying? But I do listen to Joe Budden podcast. And, you know, the show used to be so fun to me. You know, they used to talk about a lot of fun things. But as I noticed over time, like, it seemed things have gotten a little bit more dry on the set. And it's been more so Joe Budden complaining about him not being properly compensated and all the different business issues that he's been having with Spotify and all these other business partners that he's been involved with. And now it looks as if Rory and Mal has had enough and is no longer being a part of this podcast, everybody. It's been about 2 episodes, it's about 2 weeks, and Rory and Mal has completely disappeared from the Joe Budden podcast with no true explanation, except for a couple of Twitter posts, basically a couple of Twitter posts and subliminal messages, you know what I mean? And Joe Budden decided to go on his show and basically say he wasn't sure when they were coming back to the show, but the door would be open. Now, he also insinuated that him and Rory were getting into verbal altercations back and forth, and Rory was basically saying that Joe Budden wasn't his friend when he made a joke towards him, and he's like, okay, so what's that about? And to me, I'm like, okay, if Rory is upset and decided to leave the show, what does that have to do with Mal? Like, why would Mal agree to leave the show? And the only thing I could think of, if these guys are so-called friends like they say they are, is money. Is it possible that Joe Budden had them putting out money for his co-host and, you know, spreading the love a little bit financially? You know what I'm saying? Like I said, this is all allegations. You know, this is my own analysis of the situation and what could actually be going on behind the scenes of the Joe Budden podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, something is not right now. And on top of that, you know, I had watched the episode where Joe Budden like announced his deal with Patreon, and Mal and Rory didn't seem very excited about it. They didn't seem really moved by it, which leads me as a viewer and a listener to speculate, like, did they not get in on that deal? Was that deal literally just for Joe Budden and Rory and Mal was not going to get any money from it? Like, you know, is that what has completely shifted the mood and the energy for their podcast? Because according to DJ Academics, he made a statement on his Twitch, because that dude, he always runs his mouth. But he was basically trying to say that Rory and Mal wasn't getting paid that much money in the first place. And basically nobody at that place was getting paid. But also there's rumors going around saying that Joe Budden and Academics is actually working on their own podcast. So is it a possibility that, you know, Joe Budden is trying to release the dead weight so he can merge and make an even bigger platform? Because if you really look at the success of the Joe Budden podcast compared to other bigger crossover podcasts who are not of urban, aka like white podcasters and stuff like that, his numbers isn't as high as we compare it. You know, I sat and looked at his page and his numbers, and I compared them to other people that he viewed as competitors like a Joe Rogan and stuff like that. And the thing that I did notice is that Joe Budden's numbers is like minuscule compared to someone like Joe Rogan. And it, you know, it made me think about the money that they're actually bringing in since they lost their deal with Spotify. And I wonder if that is a factor. Is it possible that they're not satisfied with what they're being paid, and then on top of that, the additional financial offers that they're getting, Joe Budden is taking it for himself. He get the whatever he's supposed to be, creative director, whatever job he got. I'm pretty sure Rory and Mal probably didn't get in on that, and it's just based off of the videos I've seen on their show that I'm just speculating as a viewer that Rory and Mal didn't seem too excited about that Patreon deal. And it makes you wonder, like, is Joe Budden like, you know, really one-sided, or he feel like it's okay for the people to work around him not to get properly paid? Like, what in the world is going on over there, man? And honestly, I just want to see, is this possibly the end of the Joe Budden's podcast? I mean, they're on episode, what, 425 or something like that? And, you know, I just don't know what it's going to be. Are they going to come back? Are they going to come back to the page? Like, what is the deal? I honestly, I'm just perplexed and confused, man. But what I can say, and I just want to talk about the Joe Budden in general and his overall podcast, I can say that over the past year, you know, Joe Budden's ego has superly inflated. You know what I mean? And I feel like he had an oversaturated view of his actual show and his actual pull when it comes to viewership. And I think that's probably affecting the income of their podcast, which would also be a big factor, because of course these guys are talking because they like to talk, but at the same time they still need to pay their bills. So, you know, I was just sitting there and you know, just watching how everything has been unfolding, watching the numbers of Joe Budden compared to somebody like a Joe Rogan, watching how his other podcasts that because he said he made a Joe Budden podcast network, seeing how those other podcasts were doing, and they're not doing as well as he probably thought they were. So I'm just thinking that all of this could be just a whole financial situation, and you know, the people around him just not being completely happy or satisfied with what they're getting on their end of the deal. You know what I mean? So you know, we can speculate all day, but we want to know, when is Rory and Mal coming back, and do you guys think it's possible for Joe Budden to actually be able to keep this charade up with just him? Because I mean, to be honest with you, Joe Budden is a bit boring when he's by himself. He needs co-hosts. That's the reason why he got these two random people the past couple of episodes just sitting there just trying to fill in, and they were dry as hell. Like, honestly, I don't know, y'all. I don't know what the next step is, but all I know is Joe Budden just put together an entire big business deal with Patreon, so he should be set either way, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe Joe Budden is like, man, F it, I got this big old Patreon deal. Who cares about my podcast? I'm getting paid. You know what I'm saying? Like, could it be that? Like, could it be a thing where he's just like, I'm getting paid, forget about y'all, who cares? We don't really care about the direction, and he's willing to bring in new co-hosts because it's the Joe Budden podcast. And it's kind of weird when the podcast is named after one person. It's hard for you to be able to come in and have your say because they own the name. It's their name. So it's probably kind of tough on the business side for Rory and Mal to really be able to get what they want when it comes to compensation and everything else. So I just want to see how this is going to unfold. And do you guys think Rory and Mal is going to all of a sudden pop out of nowhere and be on a different podcast or make their own podcast if they decide not to come back? What exactly happened? And people that's out there who listen to the podcast, I listen to the podcast. I got to his podcast about a year ago. And, you know, I can't say I was more so on the tail end. There's other videos that I watched where people was giving a description prior to his deal going sour with Spotify. Because I was listening to it before the deal was going sour with Spotify. And it was funny. But as the deal went sour with Spotify, Joe Budden just seemed to be more about complaining about the things that he didn't get or the things that went wrong in business deals, and trying to throw, you know, I guess his potential, the platform that's been supporting him and the networks that was supporting him under the bus, and basically turning it into basically a I don't know, a crybaby tour, just crying over his numbers, crying over not getting paid, this, and this. And for me, like, when I evaluated and compared his numbers to those of the other people that were supposed to replace him, like Joe Rogan and everything else, like, Joe Budden's numbers aren't as high world-wise and worldly compared to a Joe Rogan. And that's just what it is. And it's the same thing when it comes to, like, YouTube and different things. I noticed that on the urban side of YouTube compared to the pop side of YouTube, if you know what I'm saying, the viewership spectrum is so tiny compared to that. Like, I thought, you know, when I seen like a black YouTuber get 1 million subscribers, I'm like, oh, this shit is lit. But then I'll go to other YouTubers, you know what I'm saying, and I see that they got 25 million subscribers. So this is like nothing, you know what I'm saying? And when you have somebody like a Joe Rogan that got 10 million subscribers, and then you go to Joe Budden's podcast, and not trying to down him, but he's like, he just hit over 900,000 subscribers on YouTube compared to Joe Rogan's podcast that has 10 million subscribers. I feel like it made perfectly good sense for Spotify to probably invest more money and be willing to pay that amount of money, whatever they paid Joe Rogan compared to Joe Budden, because the numbers don't lie at the end of the day. You know, you can try to blame it on, you know, whatever it is, whether it could be a racial thing, what it could be entertainment-wise. Maybe Joe Rogan has more diversity on his topics. I don't listen to Joe Rogan's show. But I feel like Joe Budden, where he gets stuck at it, and it's nothing wrong with that. You have to choose your audience. That's the one thing about building a podcast is important, is picking your audience so you can focus on that audience and grow your brand. But I feel like the part that Joe Budden is really like missing out and kind of like flubbing up on is because he's basically cornered himself into one demographic, which is urban podcasts. And unfortunately, it's like the numbers compared to I would say like I say, Joe Rogan or someone who talks more about pop culture, podcast numbers his numbers like literally minuscule compared to theirs. You know what I mean? So I just was thinking about several other things and like just thinking about money wise, like what could be a factor of that? Like what could be the factor of why Rory and Mal left? And we just evaluating his numbers compared to a Joe Rogan, and then all this stuff going on where he's trying to bring it basically do this deal with Patreon, and it doesn't look as if Rory and Mal is like getting paid much for it. That could make you just want to jump ship, okay? Especially if your numbers isn't hitting as hard as these bigger podcasters. It'll make you just be like, you know what? I don't even know what I'm doing this for. I'm out. Now, do I want to see them reunite? Yeah. And I hope Joe Budden swallows his pride and really apologizes to them behind the scenes. You know, forget all this on front of the scenes. We know that this is for the cameras. We know that you guys do this for the cameras. You do it for the people. You know, you try to entertain us. You try to do whatever you got to do, right? But at the same time, you want to make sure that you try not to burn all your bridges and try to keep as many real people around you in the entertainment industry, because most of the people out here are fake and they're looking to use you. So, you know, Joe Budden, if you could scrape up some extra money to pay your people, man, pay your people. Don't ruin something so great. Like, honestly, and just because I'm talking about his numbers and saying 900,000 isn't much to a person with 10 million subscribers like a Joe Rogan. Hey, I'm a small YouTuber myself and building my podcast myself. So his 900,000 is like humongous compared to my numbers. But all I'm saying is that at the end of the day, financially, Joe Rogan probably got so much more for his team to eat, and maybe Joe Budden doesn't have as much, but he could try to make it work so everybody literally has a seat at the table and has some money in their pocket and they can feed their families after all of this. Because at the end of the day, there's really not that many great urban podcasts out besides him. I mean, Joe Budden has basically been the face of urban podcasting for quite some time now, and then now we got a lot of other podcasters coming in and more. Including Drink Champs, Joe Budden. I would say the top ones that I think of when I think of hip hop and urban podcasts is the Drink Champs, Joe Budden. But I really like Joe. You know, I listen to Joe Budden more often, and I just feel like he is needed for the culture. He's important, especially when he's talking about being an independent businessman in media. I think that he needs to really just get his shit together, okay? Because we really want to see the Joe Budden podcast with the original three. You feel me? I'm not trying to see the Joe Budden podcast without the original three. That's just what it is. I mean, I could sit here all day and be like, oh, no, it's fine, this and this. But who really wants to sit here and watch the podcast with no Rory and Mal? And I want to know y'all opinion. Is it Joe Budden's fault? Do y'all think it's Joe Budden's fault that his podcast is falling apart? Do you feel like Joe Budden didn't take the correct marketing measures to really, really amplify him and really build and take his overall podcast network to the next level? You know what I mean? And also, you know, he did create a network. He had 2 other female podcast shows on there. But honestly, I feel like if Joe Budden is really trying to turn this into a network, I feel like he needs to expand more and try to bring in some more diverse groups of people to the platform, and also maybe additional male podcast show. But I know he's not going to do that because he's the alpha male and he don't want nobody competing, no males competing with his podcast. So that's probably why he decided to do 2 female podcast shows. But dude, like, seriously, if you really want your YouTube channel to hit a million subscribers, you're going to have to do that first. But the first step by bringing back Rory and Mal and making sure that they're paid and getting this all resolved. Because if not, man, your podcast and your show is in trouble, bro. And it would suck to see them bow out so just unprofessional and just so messy and just so ghetto, like. And that's the problem with black people when they try to build stuff. You know, black folks try to come together and they mainly ran. I'm talking about the stuff that's mainly ran by black folks. I know it's a couple of, you know, white people that's on Joe Budden podcast, the producer and Rory. But I'm talking about when it's like Joe Budden's a black guy, he's heading the thing, okay? I'm just talking about our people for a second and how black people have the tendency starting something and not finishing it or ending it in a messy way, in an unprofessional way, because their unprofessional matters and their cheapness and not wanting to pay people. Like, come on, y'all got to do better. You can't build a brand and just use people and not make sure that they're gonna eat, that your people is eating, bro. So hopefully Joe Budden is sitting back and trying to figure this out with his manager or whoever it is, and taking a little bit of that Patreon check and making it stretch the long way for Rory and Mal so they can get back on the show. Because if not, I just feel, and this is not me trying to throw salt or anything like that, but I feel like if he don't get it together, Gully the King and Wallow is going to be on that ass, and it's going to take over this whole entire podcast game when it comes to the male hip-hop sector, for real. Like, when it comes to the urban hip-hop sector, like, look, that's just what it is, okay? That's just what it is, you know, and you know, with like the circle of life, this entertainment industry is a circle, baby. Like, you come in, there's somebody watching, they want to come in and take your place, you slip and fall, hit the ground for 2 seconds, and they're back, and they got the baton, and they're taking over your spot. So, Joe Budden, get it together, man. Like, really get it together, because I could just see something like, you know, Wallow and Gully the King and their podcast, $1 million worth of game, literally just going way far past you, because Gully the King and Wallow's mindset is really about teamwork and let's work together and let's get our money. And that's something that they said on the Breakfast Club. They try to work with people that's about their money and about making sure that both of them are eating. But if you just there with 3-4 people and you only care about you eating a steak and the rest of them can just eat cheeseburgers, it's not gonna work out. They're gonna want their steak too, Joe Budden. So please try to do what you need to do. I don't know if this is true. This is just my perspective from what I'm seeing. Allegations, not saying that this is what you've done, but this is what the streets is saying, is that what you've done. So please try to fix it before you end up falling and you go running, and then you fall, and then the baton is passed over to somebody like Gully the King, and now he's gonna be the king of podcasting, because he's already coming up, man. He's coming up, and he's close to surpassing you, Joe. It's time for you to, the smoke is under your feet, man. The smoke and the dust is flying at you. What you gonna do, Joe Budden? What you gonna do? All right? But and it's all respect, you know what I'm saying? All love. But it's just things that I noticed, you know what I'm saying? So y'all tell me what y'all think about that. Do y'all think that we'll be able to see Rory, Mal, and Joe Budden reunite for the Joe Budden's podcast and get their money right and, you know, make it a successful podcast for the urban world? Or do you think that this is a wrap and the Joe Budden Podcasting Network is just going to crumble at his feet, you know, and he's going to basically prove Charlemagne the God right? You know what I mean? I mean, it's a lot of people that don't want to see you winning, Joe Budden. And honestly, I feel like if you collaborate with academics, it's just going to show that you can't be successful on your own, man. Prove them wrong. Prove them wrong and get your team back together. Because if not, there is somebody else that's definitely will, and they're going to come in and they're going to try to take over. And that's just what it is. I got to look at the camera. And that's just what it is, Joe Budden. Okay? Okay? All right. Thank you. DJ.